The grandfather clock in my study chimed midnight as I closed the leather-bound journal where I'd been documenting my thoughts. Another day in Oak Ridge complete. Another 24 hours of being Dr. Thomas Mercer, the man this town had come to depend on for nearly a quarter century. The MY name is Dr. Thomas Mercer, and for 23 years, I've been the most trusted physician in Oak Ridge. Our town has just under 10,000 souls, small enough that the grocery store clerks know your children's names, but large enough to harbor secrets. At least that's what my wife Claire thought that I ran my fingers across the polished mahogany desk, an heirloom from my grandfather, who had also been a doctor in his time, though in Boston rather than our quaint Connecticut town. Outside, the April rain tapped gently against the windows of our Victorian home, the one everyone in town recognized for its distinctive blue trim and wraparound porch. Claire had insisted on that particular shade of blue, claiming it reminded her of the Mediterranean coast where we'd spent our honeymoon all those years ago. Coming to bed soon? Claire's voice floated from the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the hallway light. Just finishing up some patient notes, I replied, offering her the smile that had become almost automatic after decades of marriage. The smile that said everything was fine, everything was normal, everything was exactly as it should be. She nodded, the light catching the silver strands now appearing in her auburn hair. Don't stay up too late. The hospital board meeting is at 7 tomorrow. I won't, I promised, watching as she retreated back into the hallway, the soft padding of her slippers against the hardwood floors fading as she ascended the stairs. Turned back to the window, watching rain droplets race down the glass. This house on Maple Street had been our dream, purchased when I was just establishing my practice and Claire was pregnant with our first child. We'd stretched our finances to afford it, believing the Victorian would be the perfect place to raise a family. In many ways, it had been. Our life looked perfect from the outside. It always had. In Oak Ridge, being the town doctor means more than just treating illnesses. I was the confidant, the advisor, the shoulder to lean on. I delivered babies who grew up to bring their own children to my practice. I comforted the dying and counseled the grieving. The Mercers were fixtures at every community event, Claire organizing the annual charity auction while I served on the town council, and the hospital board. That MY morning routine had remained virtually unchanged for 2 decades. Up at 5:30 a.m., a 3-mile run through Oak Ridge's quiet streets while the town still slept, shower, breakfast with Claire when she awakened at 6:45, and then the short drive to my practice by 8 o'clock. My nurse, Margaret Patterson Magito, everyone except patients, would already have coffee brewing and the day's files organized. Morning, Dr. Mercer, she'd say every day, handing me my first patient's chart along with a steaming mug. Mrs. Abernathy called about her test results, and the Johnson's baby has an ear infection. I squeezed them in at 11:30. That particular Tuesday in early autumn began like any other. The waiting room slowly filled with familiar faces. Elmer Hudson with his chronic back pain, little Sophia Kim for her kindergarten vaccinations, teenagers with sports physicals, elderly patients with medication refills. Between appointments, I returned calls, reviewed lab work, and consulted with specialists about referred cases. At lunch, I walked the 3 blocks to Davidson's Deli, where Harriet Davidson always set aside my usual turkey on whole wheat, no matter how busy they were. Beautiful day, isn't it, Dr. Mercer? She called as I entered, the bell above the door announcing my arrival. Claire stopped by earlier for her vegetarian wrap. Said she's busy getting ready for the new exhibition at the gallery. Thanks, Harriet. Yes, she's been working overtime on that installation, I replied, dropping my usual $5 tip into the jar labeled College Fund for the Davidson twins. Walking back to the office, I passed Claire's gallery, Oak Ridge Arts, housed in a refurbished storefront on Main Street. Through the large display window, I could see her arranging lighting for a large abstract canvas. She didn't notice me passing by, absorbed in her work, her brow furrowed in concentration the way it always did when she was focused on something creative. Claire's gallery had become an unexpected success in our small town. When she first proposed, opening it 8 years ago, I had worried that Oak Ridge might not support such a venture. But Claire had proven me wrong, bringing in artists from surrounding counties and even hosting traveling exhibitions from New York galleries. She'd created a cultural hub where none had existed before. teaching watercolor classes to everyone from restless teenagers to retirees looking for new hobbies. Your wife has a good eye. Mayor Richard Green often told me during our monthly golf games at the Oak Ridge Country Club. She's put our town on the map for something besides that manufacturing plant on the edge of town. We lived in the renovated Victorian on Maple Street, the one with the wraparound porch where Claire hosted her famous summer garden parties. 2 children, both away at college now. A golden retriever named Scout. Christmas cards that everyone kept on their mantles a little longer than the others. Our daughter, Eliza, was studying pre-med at Johns Hopkins, following in my footsteps despite my careful efforts never to pressure her. Our son, Marcus, had surprised us by pursuing music at Berklee College of Music in Boston, his cello skills earning him a partial scholarship. The empty nest had been an adjustment, but Claire and I had settled into a comfortable routine, finding time for each other in ways that had been impossible during the busy child-rearing years. On Sundays, we'd attend the 10 a.m. service at First Presbyterian, where I'd served as an elder for the past decade. Afterwards, we'd often have brunch with the Phillipses, Reverend James Phillips and his wife, Margaret, a breast cancer survivor I'd diagnosed early enough to save her life 5 years prior. Then home for Claire's weekly phone calls with the children while I tended to the garden or caught up on medical journals. Claire ran the local art gallery downtown and taught watercolor classes on weekends. Beautiful, graceful Claire with her perfect smile and that laugh that made everyone want to be in on the joke. We were the couple others measured their marriages against. After 23 years of marriage, Claire still turned heads. She'd maintained her figure through regular yoga and swimming at the Oak Ridge Recreation Center. Her face had the subtle lines of a woman in her late 40s who had laughed often and lived well, her emerald eyes still as bright and engaging as when we'd met in the university library 3 decades ago. "You two make it look so easy," they'd say at dinner parties and town functions, watching as Claire and I moved in perfect synchronicity, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences. Even our arguments were conducted with a certain civility that had become second nature. Disagreements about Eliza's choice of medical schools or Marcus's decision to pursue music instead of a practical degree were discussed in measured tones behind closed doors, never spilling into public view. We'd learned early in our marriage that a united front was essential, especially in a town where everyone knew your business, or thought they did, if only they knew how hard we'd worked. The marriage counseling after my residency when I was barely home. The difficult pregnancy with our second child, the year Claire's mother died. But we persevered, or so I thought. There had been challenges, of course. During my residency, I'd worked 100-hour weeks, coming home only to shower and sleep before returning to the hospital. Claire had been alone with infant Eliza, trying to finish her master's thesis in art history, resentment building with each missed dinner and forgotten anniversary. I didn't sign up to be a single parent. She'd finally exploded one rare evening. When I was home we'd sought counseling then, learning to communicate better, to carve out protected time for our marriage even amid the demands of my career and our growing family. When Marcus was born 3 years later, the pregnancy had been complicated by placenta previa, requiring Claire to be on bed rest for the final trimester. I'd reduced my hours, hired help, and personally managed her care, terrified of losing her or our son. Then came the year when Claire's mother was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. Claire had temporarily moved back to Boston to care for her, taking 12-year-old Marcus with her while Eliza stayed behind with me to avoid disrupting her high school experience. For 6 months, our family lived divided between 2 states. Claire shouldering the burden of watching her mother waste away while trying to maintain normalcy for our son. When her mother finally passed, Claire returned to Oak Ridge hollow-eyed and 15 pounds lighter. She'd slept in the guest room for months, grief creating a wall between us that only time and patience would eventually penetrate, but we'd weathered those storms. We'd rebuilt, recommitted, found our way back to each other time and again. Our love had seemed resilient, adaptable, enduring. Or perhaps I'd simply become complacent, mistaking routine for resilience, familiarity for intimacy. It started with small things, changes so subtle that anyone who didn't know Claire as intimately as I did would never have noticed. The first indication came in early September, shortly after our 23rd anniversary dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant in neighboring Westfield where we celebrated every year. Claire joined the gym, which wasn't unusual. She'd always been health conscious. But her sudden interest in CrossFit at 47 raised my eyebrow. When I asked about the change from her usual yoga routine, she shrugged. "I just feel like challenging myself differently," she said, avoiding my eyes as she packed her new athletic wear into a gym bag. Yoga wasn't giving me the results I wanted anymore. I nodded, watching as she selected a pair of expensive training shoes I didn't recognize. Claire had always been fashion conscious, but practical. These shoes, with their neon yellow accents and technical design, seemed like an unnecessary splurge for someone just trying something new. Within weeks, I noticed other changes. New clothes appeared in her closet, not just workout attire, but dresses with lower necklines than Claire typically wore, jeans in a tighter cut, blouses in colors she'd previously claimed didn't suit her complexion. When I complimented a particularly vibrant blue top, her response was oddly defensive. "Don't sound so surprised. I'm not completely set in my ways," she snapped before softening. "I just thought it was time for a change." She changed her perfume as well, abandoning the jasmine scent she'd worn throughout our marriage for something more citrusy and vibrant. Her hair, usually kept in a practical shoulder-length cut, grew longer, and she began highlighting it, the salon appointments appearing more frequently on our shared calendar. But the most telling change was her phone. Claire had never been particularly attached to her device before, often forgetting it at home or letting the battery die without concern. Now, it became a guarded possession, always face down when not in use, always with her, even on the short walk from the living room to the kitchen. The subtle ping of text messages would pull her attention immediately, her fingers quickly typing responses with a small smile I couldn't quite interpret. Passwords changed. Our shared online calendar became less detailed, with blocks of time simply marked gallery business, instead of the specific appointments and meetings she'd previously listed. Late meeting at the gallery became a weekly excuse for missed dinners, her return home accompanied by the faint scent of wine and an overly detailed explanation of which artists or clients she'd been meeting that I told myself not to overreact. Claire's gallery was doing well, expanding its reach beyond our small town. It made sense that her professional obligations would increase. The changes in appearance could easily be attributed to the normal desire to refresh oneself at midlife. The phone guardedness. Well, everyone had become more attached to their devices these days, hadn't they? Then came the conversation with Nurse Patterson that I couldn't rationalize away. It was during a rare, quiet moment at the practice, the afternoon lull between the lunch rush and the after-school appointments. Maggie had brought in the labs for Mrs. Jennings' thyroid panel and lingered in my office doorway. "Dr. Mercer, are you and Claire coming to the hospital fundraiser on Saturday? The committee was hoping you'd say a few words about the new pediatric wing." "Of course," I replied, glancing up from Mrs. Jennings' file. "Claire has it on our calendar. She's donating one of her watercolors for the silent auction." Maggie nodded, but something in her expression made me pause. There was a hesitancy and uncharacteristic awkwardness in her usual efficient manner. "What is it, Maggie? Is there something else I should know about the event?" She fidgeted with the lab papers. "Oh, no, nothing about the fundraiser. She stopped, visibly uncomfortable. "I was just wondering how you felt about Claire's new friendship with Coach Wilson. The two of them were so involved in planning the athletic department benefit last month, and they seemed quite collaborative." The way she emphasized that last word sent a chill through me, though I maintained my professional expression. "Claire is always generous with her time for community projects," I said neutrally. When I looked confused, she quickly changed the subject, mumbling something about Mrs. Jenkins waiting for her flu shot and hurrying from my office. That evening, I casually mentioned the hospital fundraiser to Claire over dinner. "Maggie mentioned you're donating one of your watercolors," I said, watching her reaction carefully. "Yes, that marsh scene from Chadwick Preserve that sold so well as prints," she replied, her focus on precisely cutting her salmon fillet. "I thought it would fetch a good price." "She also mentioned you worked closely with Jason Wilson on the athletic department benefit. I didn't realize you were involved with that." Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth, a momentary hesitation before she continued the motion smoothly. "Oh yes, the high school asked the gallery to help source some sports memorabilia for their auction. Jason was the point person for the athletic department. It wasn't a big project. She took a sip of wine, then redirected. How was your day? Did Mrs. Abernathy's test results come back? I allowed the subject change, filing away both the information and her reaction for later consideration. Jason Wilson, the high school football coach who'd led our team to state championships 3 years running. Former college athlete with shoulders like a bull and a jawline for magazine covers. Divorced 2 years ago. 15 years younger than me. Wilson had moved to Oak Ridge 5 years earlier, hired to revitalize our struggling athletic program. He'd succeeded spectacularly, bringing not just winning seasons, but college scholarships for students who might otherwise never have left our small town. The community adored him. Mothers volunteered enthusiastically for booster club activities. Fathers clapped him on the back at games. Students looked at him with undisguised hero worship. I treated him professionally only once, for a minor knee strain after he'd demonstrated tackling techniques to the team. He'd been respectful, calling me sir despite the fact that I'd insisted on Tom. His medical history had been unremarkable, healthy, fit, no chronic conditions. I remembered thinking that his physicals must be simple affairs for whatever doctor handled them. Now that I dismissed the thought immediately. Claire wouldn't. We had history, respect, love. We'd overcome far greater challenges than midlife restlessness. Besides, Claire had always disdained affairs, calling them lacking in imagination when we discussed friends whose marriages had fractured due to infidelity. If you're that unhappy, leave cleanly, she'd said during one such conversation. Don't degrade yourself and everyone involved with sneaking around. But then came the whispers at the supermarket, the knowing glances at church, the sudden silence when I approached groups at community functions. It happened first at the pharmacy, where I'd stopped to pick up a prescription for Mrs. Johnson's arthritis. Alice Miller, who'd once brought her son to me for weekly allergy shots, fell silent mid-sentence as I rounded the aisle, her eyes darting to her friend Beverly with a look that communicated volumes. "Hello, ladies," I'd said pleasantly. "Beautiful autumn we're having, isn't it?" "Oh, yes, Dr. Mercer," Alice had replied, her voice overly bright. "Just gorgeous. We were just saying how nice the decorations look on Main Street for the Harvest Festival. Will you be judging the pumpkin contest again this year?" The conversation that followed was painfully stilted, both women smiling too widely, their eyes filled with something I eventually recognized as pity at T church that Sunday. Similar scenes played out. The usual invitations to join groups for lunch afterward were conspicuously absent. Reverend Phillips clasped my shoulder with extra firmness during the greeting line, holding my gaze a beat too long. "If you ever need to talk, Tom," he said quietly, "my door is always open to you." I nodded, confused but beginning to feel the first stirrings of genuine concern. Claire, beside me, was engaged in animated conversation with the church treasurer about upcoming renovation needs for the children's wing, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us. Walking to the car afterward, I noticed Jason Wilson getting into his black SUV across the parking lot. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, focusing intently on his key fob. I glanced at Claire, who was digging through her purse for her sunglasses, seemingly unaware of his presence. That night, I checked our shared credit card statement. Online, scanning recent charges with new attention. Most were routine: groceries, gas, Claire's hair salon, my monthly golf club dues. But there were also charges I didn't recognize. A boutique in Westfield I'd never heard of, a liquor store purchase on a day I knew Claire had claimed to be working late at the gallery, a rideshare service used on multiple occasions despite the fact that Claire always drove her own car around town. The doubts I'd been suppressing began to crystallize into genuine suspicion. I'm not proud of what I did next, but when your life is falling apart, pride takes a back seat. After 2 weeks of increasingly disturbing observations, Claire's unexplained absences, stilted conversations with neighbors, and the growing knot in my stomach, I made a decision that violated the trust that had been the foundation of our marriage. That I hired someone, not locally, of course, where it might get back to Claire or damage my reputation. Instead, I drove to Hartford on the pretext of a medical conference and met with a private investigator recommended by a college friend who practiced law there. Michael Dawson had the weathered face of a former police officer and the discreet manner of someone accustomed to handling sensitive matters. "I need information," I told him, sliding an envelope with photos of Claire and a retainer check across. His desk. My wife's schedule, her movements, who she's seeing. Dawson didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply nodded, taking notes about Claire's routines, her vehicle, the locations she frequented. This type of surveillance is straightforward, he assured me. I'll be discreet. No one in your town will know I'm there. I drove home that evening feeling simultaneously relieved and disgusted with myself. 23 years of marriage had come to this, paying a stranger to spy on the woman I'd built my life with. But the alternative, continuing to smile through community events while everyone whispered behind my back, had become unbearable. 3 days later, Dawson called. I have information, he said, his voice professionally neutral. Would you prefer to discuss it by phone or in person? In person, I replied immediately, my heart pounding. We arranged to meet at a roadside diner halfway between Oak Ridge and Hartford, the kind of anonymous establishment where two men with a manila folder between them wouldn't draw a second glance that I received a folder with photographs. Claire and Jason entering a motel 30 miles outside town, her hand resting comfortably at the small of his back as he held the door. Claire and Jason at a restaurant in the next county over, holding hands across the table, her head thrown back in laughter. At something he'd said. Claire and Jason kissing in his car behind the high school gymnasium after hours, her fingers threaded through his hair. The timestamps showed a pattern, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when Claire claimed to be meeting with artists or gallery clients. Occasionally Saturday afternoons, when I was occupied with hospital board meetings or catching up on paperwork at the practice. There's more, Dawson said quietly, sliding another set of photos across the table. These showed Claire entering a real estate office in Hartford, shaking hands with an agent. Another captured her viewing an apartment, the agent gesturing around a sunny living room with large windows. She viewed 3 properties, Dawson informed me, based on her conversation with the agent, which I could partially overhear from my position. She's considering relocating to Hartford in the coming months. I stared at the evidence of my wife's double life, feeling strangely calm now that uncertainty had been replaced with confirmation. The suspicions that had eaten away at me for weeks had been justified. The sidelong glances, the abrupt silences, the changes in Claire's behavior, all explained by these glossy 8x10 photos spread before me. I can continue the surveillance if you'd like more information, Dawson offered. Some clients want to establish patterns over a longer period. I shook my head. This is sufficient. I paused, then asked, in your professional opinion, how long has this been going on? Dawson considered. Based on their comfort level with each other and the established routine, I'd estimate at least 6 months, possibly longer. This isn't a new development. 6 months. While I'd been planning our summer vacation to Nantucket, while I'd been helping Eliza select her medical school apartments virtually, while I'd been serving on committees and treating patients and believing my marriage was solid, if comfortable. I drove home in a state of focused anger, the folder on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. Claire was teaching her Saturday watercolor class until 4 o'clock, giving me time to compose myself, to decide how to confront her with what I knew. When she arrived home, her cheeks were flushed with the satisfaction of creative work, a few specks of blue paint dotting her sleeve. For a moment, she looked so much like the woman I'd fallen in love with, passionate about art, slightly disheveled in her concentration, that my resolve wavered. Good class, I asked from my position at the kitchen island, where I'd been pretending to review medical journals. Wonderful, she smiled. Mrs. Henderson finally mastered perspective after weeks of struggle. You should have seen her face when she got it right. She hung her tote bag on the hook by the door, then moved to the refrigerator. Have you eaten? I can make us a quick pasta for dinner. I'm not hungry, I replied, watching as she poured herself a glass of water. Claire, we need to talk. Something in my tone must have alerted her. She turned, glass in hand, her expression guarded. What's wrong? I slid the folder across the counter toward her. I know about Jason Wilson. Her face went through a rapid progression of emotions, shock, denial, anger, and finally resignation. She didn't open the folder, didn't need to. We'd known each other too long for pretense. How did you find out? She asked quietly. Does it matter? Half the town knew before I did. Claire set her glass down carefully. It's not what you think. No, I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. You're not sleeping with a man 15 years younger than me. You're not looking at apartments in Hartford. You haven't been lying to me for months. She flinched at each accusation but didn't deny them. I wasn't looking for this to happen, Tom. But Jason makes me feel alive again. And what have I made you feel for 23 years? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Safe, she said, as if that were inadequate, as if safety weren't the foundation I'd built our lives upon. I gave you stability. I continued, the words pouring out now. A beautiful home, social standing, children we raised together, financial security that allowed you to pursue your passion for art when many women your age were still climbing corporate ladders or raising children. Claire's expression hardened. Is that what you think our marriage has been? A transaction? You provided material comfort, so I should be eternally grateful and ignore my own needs. What needs haven't I met, Claire? What was so lacking in our life that you needed to destroy everything we've built? She looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the folder she still hadn't opened. Passion, surprise, the feeling that I'm seen for who I am now, not who I was when we met or who you expect me to be. And Jason provides all that. I couldn't keep the contempt from my voice. A man who teaches teenagers to tackle each other correctly? Whose great accomplishment is getting 17-year-olds to run in the right direction with a ball? Don't diminish him, she snapped. Jason sees potential in his students that others miss. He's transformed kids everyone had written off. And yes, he sees me. Not as Dr. Mercer's wife, or as the mother of his children, or as Oak Ridge's gallery owner, but as Claire. The kitchen fell silent, the ticking of the antique wall clock marking the seconds as we stared at each other across a chasm that seemed unbridgeable. What happens now? I finally asked. Claire looked exhausted suddenly, the animation draining from her face. I don't know. I need time to think. Will you be sleeping with him while you think? The question was cruel, and I regretted it immediately, but couldn't take it back. I'll stay in the guest room tonight, she replied, ignoring the jab. We both need space to process this. That night, as Claire slept in our guest room, I sat in my study and made a decision. The desk lamp cast long shadows across the medical diplomas and community service awards that lined the walls, evidence of the life I'd built, the reputation I'd earned. If she wanted excitement, I would show her just how dangerous safety's absence could be. I opened my laptop and began crafting a strategy that would leverage all I'd learned about Oak Ridge over 2 decades of being its most trusted physician. Claire had gambled with our reputation. Now she would learn what happened when that bet was called. In a small town, information is currency. For decades, I'd been making deposits into that bank, keeping confidences, building trust, establishing myself as the voice of reason and compassion. I'd served on committees, donated to causes, attended every fundraiser and ribbon cutting. I'd listened to problems both medical and personal, offering advice that went beyond prescriptions and treatments. I'd become indispensable to Oak Ridge's social fabric. It was time for a withdrawal. The strategy had to be precise. Direct accusation would make me appear vindictive. Spreading gossip would lower me to a level unbecoming of my position. Instead, I would create a web of strategic revelations, each seemingly innocent on its own, but devastating in combination. That I started with Mayor Richard Green, whose daughter Emily I'd treated for anxiety and depression after her parents' contentious divorce. 3 years earlier, Emily had confided things about her father's behavior during that time that Richard wouldn't want made public, particularly with re-election approaching. I'd kept those confidences scrupulously, earning Richard's profound gratitude. Richard, I said over our monthly golf game at the Oak Ridge Country Club, carefully selecting a 7-iron for the approach to the 5th green. I need some legal advice. Confidentially, of course. Of course, Tom, he replied, watching my shot land neatly on the putting surface. Anything for you. As we walked toward the green, I outlined my concerns about infidelity in a marriage, the potential community impact of a public divorce, the legal implications for joint assets, including a well-known local business. Hypothetically speaking, I added, though we both knew this transparent fiction for what it was. Richard's expression grew somber, his earlier jovial mood evaporating. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, Tom. You of all people don't deserve such treatment. By the 9th hole, Richard had offered the names of the county's most ruthless divorce attorneys, along with the suggestion that the upcoming renewal of the hospital's land use agreement, which required mayoral approval, could be expedited, giving you one less thing to worry about during this difficult time. Next was Sarah Murphy, who ran Curl Up and Dye, the town's most popular beauty salon. Her son Tyler's athletic scholarship to Virginia Tech had materialized after my recommendation to an alumni contact in their orthopedic surgery department. More importantly, I'd been the one to recognize Tyler's learning disability in elementary school, arranging for testing and accommodations that transformed him from a struggling student to a successful one. Sarah, I confided during a haircut. I didn't really need, voice breaking appropriately, I need a friend right now. Sarah's scissors paused mid-snip. What's wrong, Dr. Mercer? I shared my personal struggle with betrayal and my pain at discovering infidelity, never explicitly naming Claire, but providing just enough detail for Sarah to connect the dots. By the time she was applying styling product to my hair, tears glistened in her eyes. Oh, Tom, she whispered, her hand resting sympathetically on my shoulder. I'd noticed Claire coming in more frequently for highlights and styling, but I never imagined. This is just devastating. Within hours, I knew every client in Sarah's chair would hear some version of this story, each retelling adding subtle embellishments while maintaining the core revelation. Beloved Dr. Mercer, betrayed by his wife of 23 years, that I approached Reverend James Phillips after Wednesday night Bible study, catching him alone in his office as he prepared Sunday's sermon. I'm struggling with forgiveness, I told him, perched on the edge of a chair usually occupied by parishioners seeking spiritual guidance. I've always prided myself on compassion, James, but this challenge seems beyond my strength. Phillips, whose wife Margaret's breast cancer I'd diagnosed early enough to save her life, listened with the patience of his calling as I described my marital situation. He offered prayers, scriptural comfort, and the wisdom of a man who'd counseled countless couples through difficulties. The path to reconciliation requires both parties to seek it. Tom, he said gently, you cannot walk it alone, no matter how strong your faith. The conversation ended with his promise to include an unspecified family in crisis in the congregation's prayers. No names mentioned, but in a town where church membership overlapped almost completely with my patient roster, no names would be needed. One by one, I activated my network. The hospital board chairman, the high school principal, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club president. With each conversation, I was careful to present myself as the wounded party seeking guidance, never explicitly demanding action against Claire or Coach Wilson. The effect was immediate but subtle. Claire mentioned casually over breakfast that her Thursday evening watercolor class had several last-minute cancellations. The gallery saw fewer drop-in visitors on weekends. Invitations to social functions arrived addressed only to Dr. Mercer rather than Dr. and Mrs. Mercer, as they had been for decades. Meanwhile, I documented everything. The hotel receipts Claire thought she'd hidden in her studio's supply cabinet. The text messages I'd recovered using recovery software installed during a rare occasion when she'd left her phone unattended. The joint account withdrawals for gifts that never came home. A silk tie in a size too large for me. Cufflinks when I preferred button shirts. Cologne with a woody scent I'd never worn. That I consulted the best divorce attorney in the county, not in Oak Ridge, where it would get back to Claire, but close enough. Josephine Martinez had a reputation for ruthless efficiency and unparalleled knowledge of Connecticut family law. Her office in Westfield, 20 minutes from Oak Ridge, was discreet, her client list guarded zealously. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, she informed me during our first consultation, reviewing the documentation I'd compiled. Adultery can be considered when determining alimony and division of assets, particularly when marital funds were used to support the affair. And if the unfaithful spouse works in a business where reputation matters? I asked. Claire's gallery depends heavily on community goodwill. Martinez's smile was thin but appreciative. Reputation has monetary value in such cases. A spouse whose actions damage the family's standing in the community may find themselves at a disadvantage when it comes to claiming business assets. I left her office with a clear strategy and a timeline for implementation. The notes in my leather portfolio outlined each step: continued documentation, strategic management of community perception, careful timing of legal proceedings to maximize leverage, what Claire had dismissed as safety in our marriage, the careful cultivation of social standing, financial security, and community trust, was about to become the architecture of her undoing. The annual Founders' Day celebration in Oak Ridge is an institution dating back generations. Held on the first Saturday of October, it commemorates the town's establishment in 1842 with a parade down Main Street, a craft fair in the town square, and an evening ceremony on the steps of Town Hall. As chairman of the event committee for the past 5 years, I was responsible for the final speech, traditionally a reflection on community values and shared history. This year, the celebration fell exactly 6 weeks after my discovery of Claire's affair. 6 weeks during which we'd maintained an uneasy coexistence in our Maple Street Victorian, Claire continuing to sleep in the guest room, our conversations limited to logistics and brief exchanges about children or household matters. 6 weeks during which I'd methodically implemented my plan, each strategic confidence building toward this moment. The weather cooperated beautifully, crisp autumn air, trees displaying peak foliage in brilliant reds and golds, clear blue skies. Claire stood near the podium with other committee members and town dignitaries, elegant in a burgundy dress I'd never seen before, her hair arranged in soft waves. Coach Wilson was conspicuously absent, having sent his assistant coach to represent the athletic department in the parade. Mayor Green introduced me with particular warmth, his hand lingering on my shoulder in a gesture of solidarity visible to the hundreds gathered in the square. And now, our own Dr. Thomas Mercer, whose service to Oak Ridge has been immeasurable for over 2 decades. No one embodies the spirit of our community better than the man who has delivered our children, cared for our elders, and guided us through our most vulnerable moments. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Thomas Mercer. The applause swelled across the town square, rolling through the crowd like a wave. I approached the podium with measured steps, nodding acknowledgments to familiar faces. Mrs. Abernathy with her grandchildren, the Johnsons whose triplets I delivered during a blizzard 8 years ago, Mr. Peterson who'd survived a heart attack thanks to my quick diagnosis. My gaze finally settled on Claire, standing with the other committee members, her expression a carefully maintained neutral smile. She wore a burgundy dress I'd never seen before, its neckline lower than her usual style, her hair arranged in soft waves that caught the autumn sunlight. She offered a tentative smile, unaware of what was coming. "Thank you, Mayor Green," I began, my voice carrying clearly through speakers positioned around the square. The microphone picked up the steady confidence in my tone, projecting it to every corner of the gathering. Founders' Day has always been special to me, a reminder of what makes Oak Ridge unique, our shared values, our commitment to one another, our understanding that community means standing together through life's joys and hardships. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Several heads nodded in agreement, people exchanging glances of appreciation. I paused, scanning the crowd, making eye contact with key community members I'd carefully cultivated over the previous weeks. When I came to Oak Ridge 23 years ago, fresh from my residency and eager to practice medicine in a place where relationships mattered, I was drawn by the promise of establishing roots. The promise of practicing in a place where doctor and patient could truly know one another, where healing wasn't just about prescriptions and procedures, but about presence and understanding, where trust formed the foundation of every relationship. I allowed my voice to soften slightly, inviting the audience to lean in, to feel included in this moment of vulnerability from their trusted physician. Trust is fragile, isn't it? In medicine, in marriage, in community. Once broken, it requires extraordinary effort to rebuild. Sometimes, despite our best intentions, that foundation develops cracks that cannot be repaired. The crowd grew still, sensing the shift in tone. Claire's smile faltered, uncertainty creeping into her expression as she shifted her weight from one foot to another. Several yards away, Reverend Phillips caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Recently, I've been reminded how fortunate I am to practice in a community that values honesty above convenience, dignity above momentary pleasure, commitment above selfish indulgence. When life presents its most difficult challenges, it's the character of those around us that determines whether we falter or persevere. By now, several heads had turned toward Claire, whose face had drained of color. She reached out to steady herself against the back of a nearby chair, the first outward sign that she recognized what was happening. Mayor Green, seated behind me, nodded almost imperceptibly, his expression grave but supportive. I stand before you today not just as your doctor, but as a man experiencing the pain that comes when trust is violated and vows are broken. I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion evident in my carefully chosen words. Many of you already know, through whispers and concerned glances that haven't escaped my notice, that my marriage has been betrayed through infidelity. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd, a sound like wind rushing through autumn leaves. Claire's hand flew to her throat, her eyes widening in horror. Next to her, Harriet Davidson took a deliberate step sideways, creating physical distance that symbolized the social chasm already forming. I've chosen to address this publicly not to cause embarrassment or seek sympathy, but because healing requires honesty. Just as I would never conceal a difficult diagnosis from a patient, I cannot pretend that this wound doesn't exist. Oak Ridge deserves transparency from those who hold positions of influence and trust. My gaze shifted deliberately to where the high school faculty stood grouped together, Coach Wilson's absence now glaringly conspicuous. Principal Matthews looked down at his shoes, his discomfort evident. For those who've offered support during this difficult time, I am deeply grateful. Your kindness has been a lifeline when I most needed it. I paused, allowing my voice to crack slightly, a calculated display of emotion that sent a ripple of sympathy through the audience. For those who've kept secrets that should have been shared with a friend, I understand your divided loyalties. The burden of knowing can be as heavy as the burden of experiencing. Several people in the crowd looked away, guilt evident in their averted gazes. Those who had suspected but said nothing. Those who had witnessed Claire and Jason together in neighboring towns but remained silent. And for those whose actions have directly contributed to this painful situation, my eyes found Claire's again, holding her gaze with quiet intensity. I can only hope you'll reflect on the ripple effects of choices made in pursuit of personal gratification. How they tear at the fabric of families, friendships, and community bonds that take decades to weave together. Claire swayed slightly, her complexion ashen. She took a step backward, bumping into Harriet Davidson, who shifted away as if contaminated by proximity. The crowd's expressions ranged from shock to vindication, those who'd already heard rumors nodding in grim satisfaction, others processing this public confirmation of whispered gossip. Near the back, I spotted Margaret Patterson, my nurse, with tears streaming down her face, her husband's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. This is not how I imagined marking this year's celebration, I continued, injecting warmth back into my voice. But perhaps it's fitting that even in our most challenging moments, we gather as a community. After all, Oak Ridge was founded on principles of integrity, hard work, and mutual respect. As we celebrate our history today, let's recommit to those values in all our relationships: professional, communal, and yes, marital. I concluded with traditional remarks about upcoming community projects and acknowledgments of committee contributions, maintaining my composure throughout. When I finished and stepped away from the podium, the applause was thunderous, not the polite recognition of an annual speech, but the passionate support of a community rallying around one of its wounded members. Several people stood, their ovation carrying across the town square, a public referendum on where Oak Ridge's loyalty would lie in the coming conflict. Claire had disappeared from the platform by the time I returned to my seat. Through the remainder of the ceremony, I accepted condolences and supportive touches from townsfolk filing past, a squeeze of the shoulder from the fire chief, tearful hugs from elderly patients, firm handshakes from fellow businessmen. Their loyalty was now firmly secured, the narrative established in terms favorable to me. That must have been incredibly difficult, Mayor Green murmured as we watched the high school band perform the town anthem to close the ceremony. But necessary, I think. Better to address it head-on than let the rumors fester. I've always believed in treating problems directly, I replied with appropriate solemnity, in medicine and in life. As the crowd dispersed, I caught sight of Claire at the edge of the square, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing emphatically as she spoke. Even from a distance, I could read the distress in her posture, the frantic energy of someone whose carefully constructed parallel life had suddenly collapsed. The final phase of my plan had begun. Connecticut's family court system operates on principles of equitable distribution rather than strict equality. Factors like length of marriage, contribution to marital assets, and causes of dissolution, including infidelity, financial misconduct, and damage to shared business interests, can significantly impact outcomes. With Josephine Martinez guiding my strategy, I filed for divorce 3 days after the Founders' Day revelation. The paperwork arrived at the gallery via courier while Claire was meeting with her hastily retained attorney. Maggie Patterson reported that she had personally witnessed Claire's hands shaking as she signed for the envelope, the courier uncomfortable with his role in the unfolding drama. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, Maggie told me during our afternoon break between patients. Her eyes were swollen, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. There was a hint of satisfaction in Maggie's voice, quickly masked with professional concern. Not that anyone could blame her for being upset, of course. Claire moved out the same night as my speech, taking only personal belongings to a rented apartment above Thompson's hardware store, the only landlord in town willing to lease to her on short notice. The owner, Frank Thompson, had been ambivalent until his wife reminded him that I had diagnosed their son's appendicitis just in time to prevent rupture, possibly saving his life. When Claire returned the following day with Jason to collect more of her things, they found the locks changed and a notice from my attorney explaining that removal of items from the marital home required legal documentation and supervised access to prevent disputed claims about property division. "You didn't have to humiliate me publicly," Claire said when she called, her voice tight with anger and strained from what sounded like hours of crying. "We could have handled this privately, worked out an arrangement that didn't destroy everything I've built here. Like you handled your affair privately," I replied calmly, seated in my study with the phone on speaker as I organized documentation. For Martinez, "How many hotel rooms in how many neighboring towns, Claire? How many lies about gallery meetings and artist consultations? How many times did you sit across from me at dinner and lie directly to my face?" I allowed a calculated edge to enter my voice. "You chose the path of deception. I've chosen transparency." "This isn't about transparency," she shot back. "It's about revenge. You're using your position in this town to punish me." "I'm using the truth, Claire. If that feels like punishment, perhaps you should examine why." The line went silent for several seconds before she spoke again, her voice smaller. "I need my clothes, Tom. My personal papers. Things that have no monetary value to you, but matter to me. Your attorney can contact mine to arrange supervised access." I replied, unmoved. "Everything needs to be documented now." "Is this really what you want?" she asked. "To drag each other through a legal battle that will only hurt us both? We had 23 years together, raised children together. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for everything," I said quietly. Until it didn't. The preliminary hearing occurred 2 weeks later at the county courthouse, a stately brick building where I had provided expert medical testimony dozens of times over the years. Courthouse staff greeted me by name as I arrived with Martinez, offering sympathetic smiles and reassuring pats on the arm. Claire appeared with an attorney from Hartford, Barbara Kleinman, competent according to Martinez's whispered assessment, but unfamiliar with local judges and customs. Claire's hair was pulled back severely, her clothing conservative but slightly too large, as if she'd lost weight rapidly. The bright colors she'd favored in recent months were replaced by a muted gray suit that seemed to drain what little color remained in her complexion. Jason sat in the back row of the courtroom, drawing disapproving glances from courthouse staff and local attorneys present for other cases. His athletic build, typically an asset that drew admiring looks, now seemed out of place in the formal setting, his attempt at business casual attire appearing forced and uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Martinez began once proceedings were underway, "we're seeking temporary orders regarding the marital home, business interests, and financial accounts, given the unusual circumstances of this dissolution." Judge Eleanor Barnes, a stern woman in her 60s whose grandson I'd diagnosed with type 1 diabetes the previous year, nodded. "Proceed, counselor." Martinez presented our case methodically, Evidence of Claire's affair compiled by the private investigator, documentation of gallery funds used for hotel rooms and gifts, witness statements regarding her absence from the business during posted hours, financial records showing declining gallery revenue since the affair became known, and community impact statements from business leaders attesting to the damage to the gallery's reputation. Your Honor, Martinez argued, displaying graphs of the gallery's precipitous revenue decline on a presentation board. Mrs. Mercer's behavior has not only violated the marriage contract, but directly damaged a business asset built with marital funds and Dr. Mercer's community goodwill. The gallery's success relied heavily on local patronage, which has understandably diminished in light of recent events. Claire's attorney countered that the gallery represented years of her client's professional expertise and artistic vision, that its value existed independently of my medical practice or reputation. Mrs. Mercer single-handedly transformed Oakridge's art scene, Kleiman argued. Before her gallery opened, local artists had no venue to display their work. She's brought culture and recognition to this community through her own efforts. Martinez smiled thinly. Efforts funded by Dr. Mercer's medical practice during the startup years, marketed through social connections he established over decades of service, housed in a building purchased with joint funds. Mrs. Mercer's vision may have been individual, but everything that made it viable came from marital assets and community goodwill that she has now compromised. Judge Barnes listened attentively to both arguments before issuing temporary orders. Claire could access the gallery for business purposes only during specified hours. All business proceeds would be held in escrow pending final settlement. I would retain exclusive use of the marital home, and neither party could dispose of marital assets without court approval. Additionally, Judge Barnes added, looking directly at Claire, the court advises both parties to refrain from actions that could further damage business interests or community standing until final resolution. Claire's face remained impassive, but her white-knuckled grip on the edge of the table betrayed her distress. Outside the courtroom, in the marble-floored hallway where our voices echoed against the high ceilings, I overheard Jason telling Claire, "This is just round one. We'll fight this together. My buddy from college is a paralegal at a big firm in New York. He says they see cases like this all the time. The initial rulings don't mean anything." His optimism proved short-lived. The following Monday, Superintendent Morris, whose wife was a longtime patient and whose daughter's wedding I had attended the previous summer, summoned Jason to an emergency meeting with the school board, where he was informed of a new morality clause being implemented for all athletic department staff, effective immediately. The board feels that coaches, as mentors to impressionable young people, must demonstrate exemplary personal conduct, Morris explained, sliding the document across the polished conference table for Jason's signature. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across Jason's increasingly tense features. As role models for our student athletes, coaches are held to a higher standard than other staff. Though not explicitly stated, the timing and wording made clear that Jason's involvement with a married woman had prompted this new requirement. Around the table sat board members whose children I had treated, whose medical emergencies I had managed, whose confidences I had kept for decades. "Is this really necessary?" Jason asked, his confident coach's voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty. "My personal life has never affected my performance." Board member Elizabeth Carlson, whose husband's prostate cancer I had detected early enough for successful treatment, leaned forward. "Coach Wilson, surely you understand that performance extends beyond win-loss records. It includes the example we set for young people at critical stages of development. Refusing to sign would mean immediate termination, signing acknowledged. That future similar behavior would constitute grounds for dismissal without severance or recommendation." Jason studied the document, the muscle in his jaw working as he considered his options. "And if I don't sign?" he finally asked. "Then we would regretfully accept your immediate resignation," Morris replied evenly. Jason signed, his championship rings glinting under the fluorescent lights as he gripped the pen with unnecessary force. The signature more of a slash across the page than his usual confident autograph. Meanwhile, Claire struggled to maintain the gallery's operations. Artists began withdrawing their work, citing scheduling conflicts or other commitments. transparent excuses for not wanting their creations associated with scandal. Local painter Edmund Fellows, whose landscapes had been bestsellers, called to request the return of his pieces. "It's not personal, Claire," he explained awkwardly over the phone, a conversation Claire didn't realize was on speaker while Margaret Fellows, a patient of mine for 15 years, listened in. "It's just, my agent thinks I should diversify my exhibition venues." "Edmund, you don't have an agent," Claire had replied flatly, her frustration evident. The watercolor class enrollment dropped from 12 students to 3, then to none. Gallery opening events, once social highlights featuring local wine and catered appetizers, now occurred in near-empty rooms with only Jason and a few out-of-town visitors in attendance. "It's temporary," Claire insisted during a tense phone call. With Eliza, our daughter, who had called from medical school after hearing about the Founders' Day incident. "People have short memories. In a few months, they'll be back." "Mom, you don't understand," Eliza had replied, her voice carrying the blunt pragmatism she'd inherited from me. "This isn't about short memories. It's about permanent choices." At the next hearing 6 weeks later, Martinez presented updated financial reports prepared by the town's most respected accountant, showing the gallery's 70% revenue decline. "Your Honor," Martinez argued, her burgundy suit projecting authority as she gestured toward the detailed financial exhibits. "What was once a viable business has been rendered essentially worthless by Mrs. Mercer's actions and their consequences. The gallery now operates at a loss, sustained only by Mrs. Mercer's drawing from personal accounts. Dr. Mercer should not bear the financial burden of this depreciation that resulted directly from Mrs. Mercer's misconduct." Claire's attorney argued unsuccessfully that I had orchestrated the gallery's failure through my influence in the community. "Your Honor, Dr. Mercer has engaged in a systematic campaign to alienate Mrs. Mercer from the community and destroy her business." His Founders' Day speech was calculated character assassination. Judge Barnes frowned. "Do you have evidence of specific actions Dr. Mercer took to interfere with the gallery's operations, Ms. Kleinman?" "Phone records showing he contacted artists, witnesses who heard him discourage patronage." "The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming," Kleinman insisted. "The timing, circumstantial evidence is insufficient for such serious allegations," Judge Barnes interrupted. "The court cannot hold Dr. Mercer responsible for community reactions to Mrs. Mercer's own documented behavior. Without specific evidence of direct interference, Judge Barnes remained unconvinced, ruling that the gallery's declining value should be considered in the final asset distribution, effectively reducing Claire's potential settlement. The negotiation that followed took place in a wood-paneled conference room at Martinez's firm. The late autumn sunlight filtering through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the settlement documents spread on the table. Claire sat opposite me, dark circles under her eyes, her wedding ring conspicuously absent from her left hand. Jason waited in the reception area, prohibited from joining the negotiation by Martinez's firm conditions that I in exchange for not seeking alimony, which Martinez had argued I could claim due to Claire's misconduct. I would retain the family home and my medical practice without offset. Claire would receive the now struggling gallery and a settlement amount representing approximately 25% of our remaining marital assets, significantly less than the standard division in long-term marriages. "This is highway robbery," Kleinman protested, looking to her client for direction. "Claire, we can continue fighting. This settlement does not reflect your contributions to this marriage or this community." Claire stared at the documents, defeat evident in the slump of her shoulders. "How much more will it cost to continue?" she asked quietly. Kleinman hesitated. "Legal fees would be substantial, given the complexity, and the outcome would be uncertain," Martinez interjected smoothly. "Judge Barnes has made her perspective quite clear in the preliminary rulings." Claire picked up the pen Martinez had placed before her. "I just want this to be over," she said, her voice barely audible. As she signed the agreement, tears splashed onto the signature page, blurring the ink slightly. Her attorney placed a box of tissues before her with mechanical sympathy, clearly relieved to conclude a case that had become increasingly unwinnable. "Did you have to take everything?" Claire asked as we exited the conference room, her voice hollow as we stood alone in the hallway while our attorneys discussed procedural details. "I didn't take anything from you," Claire. I replied evenly, maintaining eye contact to ensure she absorbed every word. Your choices did that. When you decided our marriage, our history, our life together wasn't enough, you set these consequences in motion. I made a mistake, she whispered, a last desperate attempt at reconciliation, or perhaps just at salvaging something from the wreckage. People make mistakes, Tom. 23 years shouldn't end like this. It ended months ago, I replied, in a hotel room with Jason Wilson. Today is just the paperwork catching up to reality. I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving Claire standing alone with the documents that formalized her fall from grace. By Christmas, our first holiday season apart in 24 years, the practical dismantling of Claire's life in Oak Ridge was nearly complete. The gallery closed permanently in November. Its prime Main Street location quickly leased to an upscale bakery owned by the mayor's niece, Emily Green. The coming soon signs went up before Claire had finished removing the last of her inventory. The bakery's cheerful blue and white color scheme a stark contrast to the gallery's former elegant neutrals. When Claire objected to the timing, the property manager, whose wife had been successfully treated by me for gestational diabetes during 2 difficult pregnancies, simply shrugged. Business is business, Mrs. Mercer, he said, pointedly dropping the doctor from her married name. The lease specifies 30 days' notice, which I provided. The space needs to generate income. Claire's apartment above the hardware store developed mysterious plumbing issues that the landlord seemed perpetually unable to resolve. Hot water became unpredictable. The heating system functioned at minimal capacity despite the approaching winter, and the promised repairs were consistently delayed by parts on backorder or contractor scheduling conflicts. I'm doing my best, Frank Thompson insisted when Claire confronted him in the hardware store, his voice carrying enough for other customers to hear. But I can't control supply chains. Her car repeatedly received parking citations despite being legally parked. When she contested them at the municipal building, clerk Doris Wheeler, whose husband's severe allergic reaction I had treated 5 years earlier when coverage of the EpiPen revealed that the couple couldn't afford the rising medication costs, processed the paperwork with excruciating slowness. The system is quite particular about documentation, Doris explained with a thin smile as Claire checked her watch repeatedly, late for an appointment with her realtor. Each citation needs to be entered separately. Jason held on to his coaching. Positioned through the football season more through necessity than choice, the school couldn't find a mid-season replacement skilled enough to maintain the team's championship hopes. He led them to regional semifinals before resigning to pursue other opportunities the following January. The official press release praised his contributions to the athletic program and wished him well in future endeavors. The truth, that parents had demanded their sons be reassigned to assistant coaches, that fundraising had dried up, that college. Recruiters had stopped returning his calls after hearing whispers about his character issues, remained officially unacknowledged but universally understood throughout the community. It's a witch hunt. Jason had complained loudly at the Oak Tree Bar and Grill, one of the few establishments where he and Claire still felt welcome, primarily because the owner's brother lived in Hartford and had no connection to Oak Ridge social circles. I'm a damn good coach. The team's record speaks for itself. Maybe it's not about the record, a visiting salesman had replied, unaware of the local dynamics. Parents care about who's influencing their kids. Our children handled the divorce differently. Eliza, analytical like me with her pre-med mind already oriented toward evidence and outcomes, requested documentation. Not the intimate details, but the timeline, the evidence, the irrefutable facts that would help her process what had happened. To her family, I need to understand, Dad, she said during a video call from her apartment near Johns Hopkins. Her eyes, so like Claire's in shape but with my intensity, were red-rimmed but dry. Not the emotional stuff, just the facts. After reviewing what I provided, carefully selected to present Claire's betrayal without unnecessarily demonizing the mother Eliza still loved, she limited communication with Claire to brief weekly calls and declined to join her for Christmas, opting instead to spend the holiday with me in the family home on Maple Street. She betrayed our whole family, Dad, she said as we decorated the tree that had always been Claire's domain, her collection of heirloom ornaments now packed away in storage. Eliza hung a simple glass ball on a branch, adjusting it with the precision she applied to everything. I can't pretend it didn't happen or that I'm not angry. Maybe someday, but not now. Marcus, more emotional and artistic like his mother, with his musician's sensitivity and need for harmony, refused initially to take sides, attempting to maintain equal relationships with both parents. He called frequently from Berkeley, his voice strained as he tried to navigate the new family geography. Mom says you're trying to turn everyone against her, he reported during one such call. She says people won't even look at her in the grocery store anymore. I'm sorry she feels that way, I replied carefully. The situation is difficult for everyone. I've simply been honest about what happened. But when his winter concert at Berkeley approached and he could offer only one parent ticket due to limited seating, he called me in tears, the conflict he'd been avoiding finally unavoidable. I don't know what to do, Dad, he confessed, his voice breaking. Mom says she's already booked her train ticket, but you've never missed one of my performances. She says it's not fair that you get everything else. It's your decision, son. I told him, masking the satisfaction I felt at his dilemma. I'll understand either way. Your relationship with your mother is important, regardless of what's happened between us. He chose me, of course. Claire's constant justifications, her need to explain and reframe what had happened, had worn thin after months of tension. Jason's awkward attempts at stepfatherly bonding, offering advice about college courses, suggesting they work out together during visits, had only highlighted what had been lost rather than creating something new. Mom cried when I told her. Marcus admitted the night before his concert as we had dinner at a restaurant near his campus. She said I was punishing her. You're not responsible for her feelings, I assured him, signaling the waiter for another round of sparkling water. Adults make choices and live with the consequences. In January, I was unanimously re-elected chairman of the hospital board during a meeting where my extraordinary grace under personal difficulties was specifically cited as evidence of my character. In February, the town council approved naming the new pediatric wing after me, with Mayor Green making the motion personally. In March, Eliza was accepted to her top-choice residency program at the same hospital where I'd completed mine, helped by a recommendation from my former mentor, who still served as department chair. Your daughter shows the same commitment to excellence that you've always demonstrated, Dr. Harrison wrote in an email accompanying the news. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Claire and Jason left town in early April, almost exactly a year after I discovered their affair. Their departure was unceremonious. No goodbye parties, no well-wishers helping to load the moving truck, no commemorative article in the Oak Ridge Gazette despite Claire's years of contributions to the town's cultural scene. Hartford proved unwelcoming. The real estate market had shifted since Claire's initial property viewings, interest rates rising enough to affect their buying power. Jason's coaching resume generated little interest at urban schools already staffed with experienced coaches who had their own established networks. Claire's attempt to open a new gallery floundered without the community connections and local artist relationships she'd relied on in Oak Ridge. They're struggling, Eliza reported after a rare lunch with her mother during a weekend visit to Connecticut. Jason's working as a personal trainer at some gym, and Mom's trying to get hired by an existing gallery rather than opening her own. She looks thin, Dad. Not in a healthy way. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and found that a small part of me genuinely was. The larger part, however, viewed their difficulties as the natural consequences of actions freely chosen. They moved further away after 6 months in Hartford, to Rhode Island, I heard. Or was it Vermont? The updates became less frequent, the details less precise, as their lives diverged further from the orbit of Oak Ridge. In town, mention of Claire's name eventually faded from conversation, like a brief disturbance in an otherwise placid pond. Occasionally, I would overhear references back when Mrs. Mercer ran the gallery, or before Dr. Mercer's unfortunate situation. But these grew rarer as months passed. New residents moved to town, unaware of the history. Longtime residents found other topics of interest. The scandal that had consumed Oak Ridge's attention became footnote, then memory, then barely that. I dated occasionally. Nothing serious. Careful to maintain appropriate distance from anyone who might be perceived as having been waiting in the wings. dinner with a recently divorced pharmaceutical representative who had no connection to Oak Ridge, theater tickets with a widow I'd met at a medical conference in Boston. These outings satisfied the community's desire to see me moving on, while requiring minimal emotional investment on my part on the anniversary of Claire and Jason's departure. I sat alone in my study, the leather-bound journal open before me as the grandfather clock chimed midnight. Outside, the same April rain that had tapped against the windows a year earlier returned, as if nature were acknowledging the symmetry of the moment. The same scene that had opened this chapter of my life now closed it, though the man sitting at the desk was not the same one who had believed in the perfect life on Maple Street. That man had been complacent, secure in his position, confident in his marriage. This man knew better. This man understood that security was an illusion, that relationships required constant vigilance, that community standing was a valuable currency to be invested wisely. That I ran my fingers across the polished mahogany, remembering Claire's insistence that safety was somehow inadequate, that passion and excitement should take precedence over the carefully constructed sanctuary I'd built for our family. How strange that she had found safety so contemptible, only to discover too late how precious it was once stripped away. The house felt different now, quieter without Claire's music drifting up from her studio, emptier without her collections, and art pieces that had made each room distinctly ours rather than simply mine. Eliza had helped redecorate after the divorce was finalized, replacing Claire's vibrant color schemes with more subdued tones, removing family photos that featured her mother, selecting new furniture that carried no history. "You need a fresh start, Dad," she had insisted, directing the interior designer with decisive gestures inherited from me. No reminders. But reminders persisted despite these efforts. The way morning light hit the kitchen table where Claire had taken her coffee. For decades, the creak in the third stair that she had always complained needed fixing. The garden visible from my study window, now maintained by a service but designed originally by her careful hand. Outside, April rain tapped against the windows, a gentle rhythm that had once formed the backdrop to Claire's soft footsteps in the hallway, her voice calling me to bed. I closed the journal and placed it in the drawer, a record of victory that felt increasingly hollow with each passing month that I had won completely, utterly. I had preserved my reputation, secured my children's loyalty, maintained my standing, and expelled those who had betrayed me. The judgment of Oak Ridge had been rendered in my favor. Justice served according to small-town rules where community opinion carried the weight of law. Yet as I rose from my desk and prepared to ascend the stairs of an empty house, past the guest room where Claire had begun her exit from our marriage, I couldn't help but wonder if winning had been worth the price. Each room I passed held memories now tainted, each object a reminder of what had been lost rather than what had been preserved. Safety, it turned out, was a cold companion on spring nights when memories echoed louder than the rain. The meticulous execution of revenge had occupied my mind for months, provided purpose and direction when betrayal might otherwise have left me adrift. But now, with that mission accomplished, the question remained, what next? What did victory mean when the battlefield was your own life, and the casualties included parts of yourself you hadn't intended to sacrifice? I reached the top of the stairs and paused outside the master bedroom door, remembering how often I'd found Claire already asleep, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a book fallen open on her chest. The perfect image of domestic tranquility, or so I'd thought. "You won," I whispered to the empty hallway. But what exactly did you win? The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, offering no answer as I entered the bedroom alone. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.